Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Good evening. Good evening. Happy Friday. And how y'all doing? Haven't done one of these on my personal page in a minute. I was actually going to have this conversation yesterday, but then I got distracted during a conversation with Spike and wiped my phone, which is what I talked about earlier. And I tell you that, yeah, when I wiped my phone and I realized that my phone was wiping, yeah, I had a few words to say as I was panicking as my phone was like doing that shutting down now, and I was like, no. But so what's going on, y'all? You guys ready to do some tap dancing or toe stepping on some toes, getting people all up in their feelings? All right, here, I'm going to give you this disclaimer. I shouldn't give the disclaimer. I should just go straight in, just go hard in the paint. But I'm going to go ahead and give a disclaimer before I get started with this. Because invariably, there's going to be people who are all up in their feelings. And, you know, by and large, I don't really care about your feelings, because your feelings are something that you choose to have. Right? Emotions are natural, but your feelings are your choice. You decide how you're going to feel about something that is said. And so let me just say this. If you decide to feel offended, that's on you, player. Not my problem, right? That's for you to deal with. But I will give this disclaimer that I'm not here to bash single mothers. So if you feel a particular way, if you decide to feel offended based on the subject title alone, that's your problem. Because it's not about bashing single mothers, right? But it also kind of plays into the overall subject matter if you have decided to feel a particular way, because that's a problem. So, yeah, as the subject says, right, that femininity can and often does thrive under patriarchy. But almost invariably, masculinity suffers under a matriarchy. Now, what do I mean by a matriarchy? You know, a patriarchal system versus a matriarchal system. I mean, the long story short, that just simply means that if it's matriarchal or patriarchal, that means that the dominant heads, the dominant people in the culture, in the society, in the family are either masculine or feminine. So obviously, you know, because remember, there's only two genders. So, I mean, that just triggered some people right there. And I really don't care if you're triggered by me saying there's only two genders. Two. One, two. God made man, and then from man he made woman. One, two. There's only two genders. I don't have to hate anyone. That doesn't make you transphobic. Makes you a believer in science, let alone a believer in the gospel and the Bible, but it doesn't make you transphobic. I don't have a fear. That's what phobia means, an irrational fear. I don't have an irrational fear of someone who proclaims himself to be a transgendered person. I just know that there are only two genders. And with that, like I said, in terms of the type of cultures, the type of societies, there's either a patriarchal society, which means it's more masculine-led, masculine-dominated, or there's a matriarchal society. And I am saying that, by and large, females, women, feminine energy can and does thrive under a patriarchal system, but males, men, masculine energy is oppressed, suppressed, degrades under a matriarchal system. Let's look at the public school system. If you were born after a certain date, I'll put it like this: if you're a millennial, you were definitely raised and you went to school under a matriarchal system. The public school system throughout pretty much your entire life has been matriarchal. I'm an old fart, right? I graduated in 1991, and while the majority of my teachers were female, there was a significant masculine influence in the education system while I was there. That makes a big difference. Now, I will tell you this. I am someone who is a big proponent, as a result of things that I've seen, observed, and even my own personal experiences. I am a big proponent of single gender schools. Yes, if it were totally and completely up to me, and in fact, with my future children, any sons I have, they will not be attending they'll be attending a boys only school, at least up until their formative years. At least K through 8, they will attend single gender schools. Why? Because I want them to get a solid foundation before they go into the high school years. And even then, I still don't plan on ever putting my kids into the public school system, because I know who's running the public school system. I understand the mindset, the ideology of those who are in charge of the public school system, and I will never allow them to have access to any child of mine. But yeah, there's a huge difference, and the public school system is a perfect example of the difference between a matriarchal system versus a patriarchal system. All of the administrators in the public school system are either women or they are males with feminine energy. And when I say all, that's not to say, oh, there's every single one. Understand, and I'm talking that from a statistical standpoint, the number is so great, the proportion is so great that it is, statistically speaking, in general, all. Okay? So don't get all nitpicky. It's so significant that it's not even worth arguing if you're a reasonable person. But yeah, I don't believe in raising boys or having boys raised in a matriarchal system, because boys, males, always suffer. And once again, always doesn't mean every single person, because you got those people out there like, well, I was a single mother and I made sure that my son was a masculine boy. Okay, listen, I said this the other day. You may have been a great single mother, right? As a single parent, you may have been a great single mother. But you need to understand, the numbers bear out. The numbers are 100% on my side, and I can post stats till the cows come home, but since you're someone who lives in their feelings, you won't care about facts. But the facts are that by and large, children suffer in single-parent households. Yeah, but see, my ex was a terrible person, and it was... see, you're not listening. You're feeling, you're not thinking. We're not talking about your specific case where your ex-husband or ex-wife was a terrible person. In that case, yes, it was probably better to remove your child from that overall situation and be raised in a household with only one parent, as opposed to being raised in a household with a parent, a second parent who's a terrible human being. I understand that. Get out of your feelings. This is a fact-based discussion. If you have a problem living in your feelings and not being able to deal with facts, you really shouldn't even be friends with me. I'm not really all that friendly to people who live in their feelings. I'm not the one to engage with, because I'm going to offend you, because I deal in facts. That's it. Your feelings are not really my concern. So if you're living in your feelings and you're like, well, but I was a great parent and, my ex was, you're not who I'm talking to. You're not what I'm talking about. However, it doesn't change the fact that children, by and large, suffer in single parent environments. It doesn't change the fact that males specifically suffer under a matriarchy. But you know what? Here's the butt naked honest truth. Here's the ugly truth. Women, females, suffer under a matriarchy because it lacks the balance. Males cannot be men in a matriarchal society. I know that's like offensive to people who, were raised as millennials and they've been drinking the Femininity Kool-Aid. But it's true, because what's funny is when I see people and I see all these very same feminists who are complaining about the lack of real men. Why do you think that is? See, even you, in a moment of clarity, in a moment of honesty, have to acknowledge that your way of thinking actually runs off real men. Real masculine men don't want to deal with the feminist type women rather. And we don't want to deal with the feminist type males. It's just a simple truth. It's an ugly truth. And the truth is rarely ever, nice and warm and fuzzy. But it is the truth, and you can build on it. You can build something solid and stable on the truth, on reality. It's just a lie, and we can see. And listen, I'm going to point at the pink elephant in the room is what I would call the African American community. Those of you who know me know, of course, that I differentiate between American blacks versus African Americans, because it's rather stupid to think that everybody who is quote unquote black, everybody who's ethnically black, has the exact same culture. I mean, that's just stupid to think that everybody who looks a particular way was born and raised in the exact same culture. I mean, how stupid are you? How racist is that? To assume that everyone based on similar melanin content was raised in the exact same culture. All cultures are not equal. There are different results, right? What is culture? Culture is an agreed upon set of norms, mores, values, and traditions held by a group of people. And so people can choose to have different cultures. So everybody who's of the same melanin or similar melanin does not have the same culture. And what we have to acknowledge is that cultures change, cultures grow and change. But, I differentiate between what I call African American culture, which is a Marxist culture. It's cultural Marxism for Negroes. That's what African Americanism is. I differentiate between African American culture versus the culture of American blacks. There's definitely a difference. Just like anyone who is from Jamaica, Barbados, who's West Indian, somebody who's African, will all tell you that there's a difference in culture between Africans versus those from the Caribbean versus those from born and raised in the United States of America. There's a difference in culture. And here's what I will tell you. The significant difference in the culture is that American black culture is predominantly a patriarchal culture, which is why it thrived and which is why it was successful, as opposed to what I call African American culture is without a doubt a matriarchal culture, and it sucks. Because all you have to do, and see, here's the thing. It's like I talk about sports. I use this analogy is you can judge a culture by the results, right? It's measurable, right? I mean, we can talk about things like corporate culture, right? If you're going to look for a new job, One of the things, what do? You go look on Glassdoor and you go look online like, oh, let me listen to people about the corporate culture of company XYZ. And they're like, oh, and you go online and they say, oh yeah, they work you like, they work you to death. The work-life balance sucks. Oh, the management sucks. They don't pay well, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, I'm not going to apply or take the job at this company because the corporate culture sucks. See, remember, I'm a diehard Detroit Lions fan. You know one of the things that's trying to happen in Detroit? They're trying to change the culture because they've had a culture of losing. They've had a culture of mediocrity. But you know what's interesting? We can take the team that arguably has the best culture in professional sports, and that's the New England Patriots. And that culture obviously is a patriarchal culture, starting with the owner, Robert Kraft, who's owned the team for 25 years now. Before, they were a team that won about the first 24, 25 years of their existence, they won about 40% of their games. They went to one Super Bowl, they went to a handful of playoffs, and they won only about 40, and they got their butts kicked in that one Super Bowl, and they only won about 40% of their games. Along comes Robert Kraft, and he starts to instill a different culture with the New England Patriots. And then he finds someone who completely buys in. See, because first he brought in Bill Parcells, and Bill Parcells has his own way of doing things. He wasn't in complete alignment. Bill Parcells is not a bad guy, but he wasn't in complete alignment with Robert Kraft. And he also bought in, I forgot the guy's name, who's now the head coach of Seattle. But anyway, but then he found Bill Belichick. And he and Bill Belichick were like here. They were here. They just were in sync. And you know what they did? They created a culture. And then they found a player like Tom Brady, who totally bought into the culture and executed the culture. And you know what they do? In the era of free agency where players can come and go as they please for the most part, they've made sure to only bring in players who will buy into their culture. And the results, listen, I don't care about your feelings like, yeah, but they're the Patriots. Shut up. You can't explain. They've been to 10 Super Bowls in 25 years. 10 Super Bowls in 25 years. Their culture is a winning culture. You can check the results. The results speak for itself. They've won 6 Super Bowls in the last 25 years. So basically every 4 years since Bob Kraft has owned the team, they've won a Super Bowl. It's their culture. And when you start looking at the difference between cultures that are matriarchal versus cultures that are patriarchal, you'll see a significant difference in progress, in prosperity, in peace, right? Here's the reality. Look at those congressional districts that are congressional Black Caucus districts, what they really should be called is congressional African American districts. And the culture in those congressional districts is overwhelmingly matriarchal. There's an absence of men in the households leading those households. Once again, if you're just tuning in, and if you are a mother who's a single parent and this idea bothers you, stay out of your feelings or just unfriend me. Because I'm not sitting there saying that every single mother is a terrible person. If you think that I'm saying that, if you feel that I'm saying that, you should just unfriend me. We're not going to get along. I don't deal with people who live in their feelings. You should just be quiet when grown folks are talking, because I only have conversations for grown folks, not for people who live in their feelings. And matriarchal cultures suck. Show me a predominantly matriarchal culture that has produced great things. Show Show me a predominantly matriarchal culture that's peaceful, that's healthy, that's prosperous. Just the epitome of a matriarchal culture is the African American community. For the last 50 years, it has been undeniably matriarchal. And the African American culture really sucks. You can look across all the parameters that you would righteously judge a culture, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's crime rates, whether it's, business growth, anything like that. And you can see that the matriarchal culture of African Americanism sucks. And you know who's going to argue the loudest about this? African American mothers. They'll be the ones who will get up in their feelings the most. And then you know who will argue the second most? African American males who were raised in a matriarchal culture, who've never actually been in touch with their true masculine spirit because it's been oppressed and twisted in a matriarchal culture. See, in a patriarchal culture, you know what you're really taught? In a true patriarchal culture, especially one with a biblical mindset, what you're really taught is to value and protect and provide for the woman. I can point to my wife. You know why my wife is she's able to be comfortable in her femininity? Is because she doesn't fight me for leadership in our family. It's it. She married a man because I was raised in a household where, and I've told every woman I ever dated, listen, here's how I was raised. I was raised to be a man and raised to be the man. And so if there's ever going to be any argument or debate about that, keep it moving. Go get with some other dude. Go get with a dude who's got a little bit more feminine energy. You'll be miserable with him, but you'll be happy in your misery because you're able to control that guy. See, in a solidly patriarchal community, both men and women, masculinity and femininity can thrive. Masculinity absolutely suffers in a patriarchal society. And you can look and see, listen, I mentor young men. And I can tell you the vast difference between the young men who've been raised in a patriarchal society versus those who are raised in a matriarchal society. I can also tell you, because Tanya and I do mentor some young women also, and I can tell you the vast difference between the women who were raised in a household where they had a solid patriarchal structure versus those who did not have that, who were raised in a matriarchal structure. There's a whole difference in the mindset and the confidence and the mental and emotional stability between those who were raised in a patriarchal culture as opposed to those who were raised in a matriarchal culture. Once again, I told you I was going to step on some toes. And so if you're in your feelings, that's your fault, because you're choosing to be in your feelings, which probably means you were raised in a matriarchal culture. Because, if you were raised in a patriarchal culture, you're more grown up. You're actually more mentally, emotionally, spiritually stable. You know that you get to choose how you feel. You especially get to choose your reaction, your response to things. But as I said, beyond any reasonable doubt, and I dare you to prove me wrong. I'm not talking about you showing me your one example, because people are like, well, I know a guy who was raised by a single mother and he's a wonderful human being. Okay. And I can point 10 guys who were raised in a similar environment and they suck as men. They suck as human beings. And they know they're miserable. They know something is missing in their spirit because they never had access to true masculine energy. I mean, you can argue all day long, you're going to lose. But you'll also be arguing by yourself because I have the facts and you don't. And I don't argue with people who live in their feelings. And as I was saying, all you got to do is look at the prime example of what happens when someone is raised, or when there's a matriarchal culture. Look at the African American, the community that's raised in African Americanism, cultural Marxism. And you need to understand that it is cultural Marxism that promotes a matriarchal society. And there's results. There's definite results. Patriarchal cultures, there's much more clarity. There's much more peace and prosperity in patriarchal societies. There's winning in patriarchal societies. You can look at the numbers. This final note before I go. If you look at the different ethnic groups in the United States of America, the United States of America is the best place you can possibly do to look at all these different stats, but because we're the most diverse nation on earth. And you can look at the stats, and we'll do, what are we going to use to judge? Finances. Let's look at the stats in terms of median household income. The African American community has the lowest median household income of any ethnic group in America. So when you break it out based on where somebody is ethnically from, whether they're from Portugal or from Nigeria or whatever, right? East Asian Indians, right, from India, people from that ethnic group have the highest median household income in America. It's something like 120, it's either 122 or 112. I don't remember the exact number. You can check it out. 122 or $112,000 median household income. Nigerians, oh, and I'm sorry, Koreans and all, they're all in the 90s and so on and so forth. Nigerians have a median household income that's somewhere in the neighborhood of like $70,000. The median household income for the United States of America is somewhere in the neighborhood of like $55,000. And the median household income for just average everyday white Americans is roughly $60,000. But the median household income for African Americans is around $30,000. So it is about, think about this. The median household income for African Americans is less than half that of white Americans. It's, almost half that of America overall. It's like, less than half that of Nigerians. Oh, wait a minute. Nigerians are black, aren't they? From Africa, right? So people who are from Africa, which makes them black, right? They're dark skin, melanin, right? Their median household income is more than double that of those who are black but born and raised in America, who are the descendants of slaves. Jamaicans have like a $70,000+ median household income. They're black generally, aren't they? Right? But East Asian Indians have a median household income of about $122,000. It might be 112. It's either 112 or 122. Either way, it's nearly 4 times higher. What's the significant difference between African American culture versus all those other cultures? The African American culture is a matriarchy, and all those other cultures are patriarchal. I mean, when you start controlling for everything else, you will see the massive difference is whether it's matriarchal or patriarchal. And when you follow the success principles out there, which all these other cultures do when they immigrate to the United States, when they have a patriarchal structure, they survive and thrive. And what people will try to do is like, well, yeah, but see, the reason why we suffer is because of the legacy of slavery. Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. Be quiet when grown folks are talking. You don't know what you're talking about. Black folks the black community was overwhelmingly intact. Even back prior to the Great Society, it's like 78% of black children were raised in a household with a mother and a father. Basically, prior to the Great Society, we had predominantly a black culture, American black culture, and it was over 70%, and it was staunchly patriarchal. But what happened? We started getting in with cultural Marxism, and there's enough blame to go around, men and women. There's enough blame to go around. But the long story short, we walked away from patriarchy, moved into matriarchy, which is what cultural Marxism produces and promotes. And look at the crap hole that the African American community is today as a result of matriarchy and cultural Marxism. Look, truth is for grown folks. If you're not grown enough to handle this truth, you should just unfriend me. Don't follow me. You're not ready for this. Come back and talk when you've grown up a little bit, when you've matured, when you're actually ready to address, when you're ready, when you're not a coward, when you're ready to have a real true conversation about how things are so you can begin to fix it. You have to properly diagnose what's taking place. I always use the analogy, and this might even step on some people's toes, but listen, it's like losing weight. Okay, maybe it's like the Nutty Professor, right? What did remember that scene in Nutty Professor when he was talking about, oh, I want to lose weight, and the father said, son, asses are fat in our family, right? He was saying the whole family. And so, okay, listen, you can come from a family where everybody says, well, this is just how we are. We're big, we're obese because of our culture, but you can decide to change and decide to adopt different cultural beliefs. What is culture, right? An agreed upon set of norms, mores, values, and traditions. You can decide to join a different culture. You can decide to lose weight, but you have to acknowledge there's something wrong with the culture in your family if everybody in your family is obese. You have to acknowledge that something is wrong with the culture in your family if everybody in your family is poor. You have to acknowledge that something is wrong with the culture in your family if so many of your people in your family end up going to jail. There's something wrong with the culture. But if you're not willing or able to acknowledge that, you're not grown up enough to have a conversation with me. Come back and talk to me when you're grown up, when you're like, hey, you know what? There's something wrong and it needs to be fixed. I don't know how to fix it. Let me go look for people. And I'm here to tell you the truth. It's the culture. And you got to flush that culture, because here's what's happening. Going back to my Detroit Lions, what's happening is the ownership is realizing that they've had a failure culture for so long. And so they're bringing in new blood in terms of the owner, with the general manager, Bob Quinn, and with Matt Patricia. And they're trying to bring in people who came from a success culture and trying to bring that from the top down and making sure everybody they bring in now adopts that success culture. Because culture trumps all. And matriarchal cultures suck. The truth is on my side. If you don't feel that way, that's your fault. You get to live with that. I feel pretty good living in truth. Truth is for grown folks. Most people can't handle the truth, but knowing the truth shall set you free. I gotta run. Take care. Thanks for listening in. God bless.